Have you ever walked into a place, not expecting red carpets or royal treatment, just hoping for a peaceful moment, only to be treated like your presence was an offense? Not invisible like dust. No, targeted, as if your very name stirred anger. Because what happened to Karoline Leavitt wasn't just a service mistake. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate power play. She just wanted lunch. A quiet table at the Ember Grill, the flagship restaurant inside her husband Nicholas Rio's newest fine dining concept, tucked in the heart of Charleston. She walked in as Karoline Weston, a pseudonym she often used to avoid political attention. But the moment the manager glanced at her, the air changed. The smile dropped, and everything she thought would be simple turned into a very public, very personal, ideological battleground. Karoline Leavitt didn't want a scene. Not today. Not after back-to-back news cycles packed with left-wing pundits twisting her words and Twitter mobs turning White House press briefings into viral combat. Today was supposed to be quiet. Just her, a table by the window, and a rare moment of peace before flying back to D.C. She wore no makeup, just sunglasses and a blazer over jeans. Nothing flashy, no entourage. She entered the Ember Grill alone, using a name she hadn't pulled out in months. Karoline Weston, the one she used when she wanted anonymity, not applause. The restaurant was sleek, polished, filled with soft jazz and the smell of grilled rosemary chicken wafting from the open kitchen. Everything about it whispered luxury, from the dark wood paneling to the clean, crisp uniforms worn by the staff. It was part of Nicholas Rio's newest high-end dining project, an elegant space that had already made waves in Charleston's culinary scene. But the moment she stepped through the front doors, Karoline sensed it. The subtle shift, a pause that didn't belong, a flicker of recognition from the hostess's eyes. And then nothing. No welcome, no smile, just a glance down, a whisper into an earpiece, and a quick excuse. "Let me grab the manager." Karoline stood still, patient but alert. Her blue eyes flicked across the space, noting the half-full dining room, the servers moving like clockwork, and a group of women laughing at a corner booth. Nothing seemed out of place except the air. The temperature in the room hadn't changed, but something felt colder. A man emerged from behind the host stand, tall, early 30s, hair slicked back a little too neatly. His name tag read, Elijah. He walked with confidence, forced confidence, and an expression that tried to be professional but couldn't quite hide the flicker of contempt in his eyes. "You're Ms. Weston?" he asked, looking her over with a faint smirk. Karoline removed her sunglasses slowly, revealing the sharp gaze that had silenced more than one roomful of journalists. "I am," she replied, calm and measured. "Reservation for one." Elijah's smile tightened. He turned to the hostess, whispered something, then looked back. "I'm sorry, Ms. Weston," he said, voice dripping with feigned apology. "There's been a mistake. Your reservation isn't in the system." "I have the confirmation email," she said, pulling out her phone. Elijah held up a hand, cutting her off. "I understand, but unfortunately we're fully booked today." Karoline's lips curled into the thinnest of smiles. "Fully booked?" "Yes," Elijah replied, with a blink that lasted half a second too long. "Walk-ins are welcome, of course, but we can't seat you without a confirmed reservation." Karoline said nothing for a moment. She simply tapped her screen, swiped to the confirmation, and held it up. Karoline Weston, Ember Grill. Table for one. 1:30 p.m. Confirmed. Elijah glanced at the screen. His jaw tightened. "That may have been entered incorrectly," he said, voice tight. "But our system—" "You deleted it," Karoline interrupted, voice low and surgical. "Didn't you?" "I'm sorry, but we reserve the right to deny service," Elijah said quickly, his smile returning, but not to his eyes. Our restaurant has certain values, Ms. Leave Weston. Karoline's smile vanished. There it is, she said, voice quiet but deadly. You recognized me. A pause. Elijah didn't deny it. I'm just doing my job, he replied, his tone now brittle. We serve a community that believes in inclusivity. And frankly, not everyone fits that energy. Inclusivity, Karoline echoed, the word like acid on her tongue. You mean exclusion, because I don't fit your political narrative. He didn't respond. I'm here for grilled chicken and iced tea, she said, stepping forward. But instead, I'm standing in my husband's restaurant being told I'm not welcome because I worked in the Trump White House. Elijah stiffened. With all due respect, Ms. Leavitt, your politics don't align with our brand. Karoline's eyes sharpened. Your brand, she said slowly, is my husband's property. And you just told his wife she's not welcome. Elijah's smirk faltered, just for a second. Enough. Karoline lifted her phone again, scrolling fast. I gave you a chance to do this quietly, she said. Now I'm calling him. She hit the contact. The call rang once. Nicholas Rio picked up on the second ring. Karoline's voice was steady, controlled. Nick, I need you to come to Ember, right now. What's going on? He asked. Your manager just told me I don't fit this restaurant's energy. Nicholas's voice dropped, low and lethal. I'll be there in 10. Karoline ended the call, lowered her phone, and looked straight at Elijah. You're about to learn what happens when you mess with the wrong Leavitt. And just like that, the war began. Elijah tried to keep his expression neutral, but Karoline could see the edges cracking. His confidence, so smug just moments ago, had started to unravel the moment she made that phone call. Karoline didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply stood there, composed and immovable, like she had during every ambush press conference and every viral smear campaign. She had been through far worse than a snarky restaurant manager playing political games in a linen apron. But what he didn't understand, what he was about to find out, is that this wasn't just a petty insult. It was a declaration of war. And she never left a battlefield until it was won. Around her, the hum of the restaurant continued, unaware of the storm brewing near the front desk. Or perhaps not unaware, just pretending not to notice. And then it happened. The soft ding of the front door. Karoline didn't turn. She didn't have to. She felt the shift in the air. Like a general stepping onto the field, Nicholas Rio walked in, his presence impossible to miss. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored gray suit, his silver-streaked hair glinting beneath the warm lights. His eyes, dark and sharp, swept across the room and landed on her. Elijah's jaw tensed as he recognized him. His lips parted, searching for something to say, but no sound came out. Nicholas approached slowly, with the kind of deliberate pace that made men nervous. He didn't rush. He didn't speak. He just walked straight toward his wife, then turned to face the man who had just tried to humiliate her in his own restaurant. "Who's this?" he asked, voice low but sharp. Karoline didn't blink. "This," she said, tilting her head slightly, "is the manager who decided I didn't match the restaurant's energy." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Elijah tried to compose himself. "Mr. Rio," he said quickly, the fake politeness flooding back. I wasn't aware she was your wife. If I had known..." "That's the problem," Nicholas cut in, voice firm. "You didn't need to know. She had a confirmed reservation, didn't she?" Elijah's mouth opened, then closed. "Yes or no?" Nicholas pressed. Elijah hesitated. She did. But the system— Don't, Karoline interrupted, her tone cool. Don't insult us both by pretending this was a glitch. You looked me in the face and told me I didn't fit your values. You erased my name from the list and tried to hide behind corporate language. Nicholas stepped forward now, eyes narrowing. You erased her name? Elijah's voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to offend anyone. I was just following what I thought were our standards. Your standards, Nicholas echoed, voice darkening. Since when did your personal politics become our hiring criteria? Elijah blinked. I thought we were a progressive brand. I was trying to uphold— You don't get to define this brand, Nicholas snapped. You manage a restaurant. You don't get to rewrite our mission. And you definitely don't get to humiliate my wife in front of staff and guests. The room had gone quiet. The bartender froze mid-polish. A couple in the back had turned fully in their seats, pretending to glance at a menu while clearly listening. You knew exactly who I was, she said softly. And instead of doing your job, you decided to take a stand. You wanted to make a statement. So here's mine. People like you don't belong in leadership. Nicholas nodded. You're done. Elijah's eyes widened. Wait, Mr. Rio, please. You're finished, Nicholas repeated, voice like a gavel. Pack your things and get out, today. You can't just fire me, Elijah stammered, suddenly finding his voice. I have rights. I was standing up for values. Your rights, Karoline said, stepping forward now, end where mine begin. You wanted a viral moment? You just got one. Nicholas turned to a nearby server. Go get the assistant manager. I want him acting GM until I appoint someone new. The server nodded and practically ran toward the back. Elijah looked like a man unraveling, his composure gone, his voice shaking. This isn't over. The media can film all they want, Karoline said, her smile returning. I've got the receipts, literally. She lifted her phone and held up the original reservation confirmation, still glowing bright on the screen. This, she said, is what accountability looks like. And with that, the crowd began to stir. Phones out, cameras up. Elijah didn't just lose his job. He became the story. The assistant manager, a young man named Marco with nervous eyes and sleeves rolled too high on his forearms, stepped out from the back room like someone summoned into a courtroom. Nicholas didn't waste time. You're acting GM, he said, eyes locked on Marco like a drill sergeant inspecting new recruits. Effective immediately. Marco's mouth opened, a response half formed, but Nicholas cut him off with a raised hand. Don't thank me. Don't explain. Just listen. I want you to escort Elijah to the back, give him 5 minutes to pack his things, and make sure he's off the premises before I count to 30 after that. Do I make myself clear? Marco swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing like a warning light. Yes, sir. Elijah let out a short, bitter laugh. This is ridiculous, he muttered. All of this over one reservation? You're firing me because I enforced standards? Karoline turned to him slowly, her expression unreadable. No, she said, voice cold and razor-thin. You're being fired because you made it political, because you decided my presence was a problem, because you thought you could get away with deleting my name out of spite and calling it standards. The guests seated near the front, several of whom had clearly started recording on their phones, shifted in their chairs. One woman whispered to her husband, "That's her, isn't it? That's Karoline Leavitt." He nodded, barely blinking as he held his phone toward the confrontation. Elijah looked around the room. He saw the cameras, the eyes, the silence, the social media storm already brewing. "You're going to regret this," he muttered. "The press will have a field day." Karoline smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I've survived worse headlines," she replied. "And unlike you, I know how to deal with the truth." Marco stepped forward, his voice tight but professional. "Sir, I'll show you to the back office now." Elijah stared for a moment longer, like he was still debating whether to go out shouting or leave quietly. But in the end, he knew. He had lost. He straightened his spine, gave a sharp exhale, and followed Marco out, his shoulders rigid and steps stiff. As soon as he disappeared behind the double doors, a low murmur broke out across the restaurant. Dishes clinked again. Silverware moved. But every table near the front was still watching Karoline, watching Nicholas, watching what they would do next. Nicholas turned to the hostess, who had remained frozen at her station through the entire ordeal. "Is table 12 still open?" he asked calmly. The hostess blinked, then nodded rapidly. "Yes, Mr. Rio, it's open." He turned to Karoline and gestured toward the dining room. "Shall we?" She gave a short nod, and together they walked past the tables, her heels clicking against the marble floor like punctuation marks in a political statement. Phones discreetly followed them. One older man muttered, "Damn right," under his breath as they passed. A young woman at a corner booth whispered, "Queen," to her friend, and gave a subtle thumbs up. They reached table 12, a cozy two-top near the window, as originally requested. Karoline slid into her seat with practiced ease, the cool poise of someone who had just delivered a press conference disguised as a public lesson. Nicholas sat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. "You didn't come here to make a point," he said softly. "No," Karoline replied. "I came for a sandwich." He smiled faintly, the storm behind them for now. "Well, now you can have both." A waiter approached tentatively, eyes wide, hands slightly shaking. "Welcome to the Ember Grill," he said. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" Karoline glanced at the menu briefly, then looked up with that cool smile. "Sweet tea," she said, her tone casual, like she hadn't just dismantled an entire political power trip in 5 minutes flat. "Extra lemon. And bring the chef out when you get a moment. I'd like to thank him." The waiter nodded quickly, then disappeared like a puff of smoke. Nicholas leaned back, arms crossed, eyes still watching her. "You're going to be all over X in about 10 minutes. Karoline didn't flinch. She pulled out her phone and opened the app. "Already trending," she said, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. Hack Karoline Faiz Elijah. Nicholas chuckled. "Want me to draft a statement?" "No need," she said, eyes locked on the screen. "I'm writing one myself." And with the quiet tap of her thumbs against glass, the next battle line was drawn, not just for today, not just for the restaurant, but for everyone watching, scrolling, and waiting to see how the story would end. Karoline didn't rush the tweet. Not because she doubted herself, she never did, but because she understood the stakes. One wrong word, and the mob would twist it, frame it, make her the villain in the very story where she was the one refused service. It wasn't enough to be right anymore. You had to be louder, sharper, and unshakable. Nicholas leaned forward, sipping his bourbon neat, the kind he reserved for boardroom victories and rare quiet nights. "Let me guess," he said. "Half the country wants to crown you. The other half wants to cancel you." Karoline didn't look up. Same country, different reflex. He smiled faintly. "Welcome to lunch in 2025. The waiter returned with the tea, eyes wide like he was carrying a sacred artifact. He set it down gently, followed by a silver tray of cornbread and honey butter. "Chef will be out shortly," he stammered, then disappeared again without waiting for a thank you. Karoline took a sip. Icy. Perfect. Just the way she liked it. For the first time all day, her jaw relaxed. But the moment passed quickly. Across the restaurant, A woman in her early 30s stood up from a corner booth and made her way over, clutching her phone like it was a shield. Her blazer was green, her eyes sharp. A badge of some local paper hung from a lanyard around her neck. "Ms. Leavitt," she said, trying to sound casual. "Kendra Weiss, Charleston Civic Weekly. Can I ask a few questions?" Karoline looked at her, expression flat. "Are you dining here?" Kendra blinked. "Well, no, Then you're interrupting a private lunch," Karoline replied, folding her napkin slowly. "But I'll give you 30 seconds. Make them count." Kendra flinched slightly, then composed herself. "Some online are saying you used your influence to get someone fired, that this is another example of political overreach from the right. How do you respond to that?" Karoline leaned forward, her voice low and precise. "I didn't ask to be recognized. I didn't demand anything special. I showed up with a confirmed reservation and was told I didn't fit the restaurant's values. He chose to make it political. I chose to make it public. That's not overreach. That's accountability." Kendra opened her mouth to follow up, but Nicholas spoke before she could. "Do you ask liberal guests why they fire people for praying at work?" he said, voice smooth but sharp. "Or why conservative employees get pushed out for wearing a flag pin?" Kendra stammered, suddenly unsure of herself. "That's what I thought," Nicholas said. The reporter backed away, murmuring something about context and both sides, and retreated to her booth. Karoline watched her go, then turned her phone toward Nicholas. The tweet had crossed 100,000 views in under 10 minutes. The comments were a familiar mix, some calling her a patriot, others calling her a fascist. A few were just fire emojis and hashtags like, "Don't mess with Karoline." Karoline picked up her tea, tapped her phone once more, and began drafting her next post. Because the first strike had landed. But the war was just getting started. By the time the appetizers arrived, smoked shrimp on rosemary skewers and a salad dusted with citrus ash, Karoline's tweet had exploded into national headlines. The restaurant's name trended alongside hers. Ember Grill, Karoline Leavitt, and the inevitable #Justice for Elijah dominated X's front page like a digital battlefield split straight down ideological lines. Nicholas scrolled his feed with one hand, sipping his bourbon with the other, his expression unreadable. "They're running wild with it," he said. "One side's calling you a modern-day Thatcher. The other's comparing you to a dictator with a designer bag." Karoline didn't flinch. "They always do," she replied calmly, slicing through the salad like she was cutting through political noise. "But they don't have what I do." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" She looked up, her eyes sharp. "The truth, and the receipt to prove it." Across the room, a few guests still whispered behind menus, phones angled like they were capturing more than just the food. The atmosphere hadn't fully settled. It was quieter, yes, but not neutral. It never would be, not after what happened. Karoline knew that. Her presence had changed the energy in the room, not because she intended to, but because people couldn't help but react to what she represented. Power, accountability, and a refusal to be silenced. The waiter returned with a refill of tea, hands slightly steadier this time. He placed it gently on the table and leaned in just slightly. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. What you did back there, some of us saw it. Some of us needed it." Karoline nodded once, not smiling, but acknowledging. "I didn't do it for applause," she said. "I did it because someone had to." The waiter gave a quick, almost grateful bow, then vanished again. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, exhaling a breath through his nose. "This isn't just about lunch anymore. You know that, right?" Karoline sipped her tea, watching the light hit the glass. "It never was." She opened her phone again and pulled up a video, one just posted by a guest who'd been seated near the hostess stand. The camera angle was grainy, shot over a glass of water, but the audio was crystal clear. Elijah's voice. "We serve a community that believes in inclusivity, and frankly, not everyone fits that energy." Then her voice, low and sharp. "You deleted my name because of my politics. That's not inclusivity. That's cowardice." The caption read, "She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to." Nicholas smirked as he watched. "They're calling it the quiet takedown." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "I call it Tuesday." They shared a look, the kind of look that didn't need words. A shared language between two people used to playing chess in a game full of checkers. But she also knew this wasn't just about restaurant politics or viral videos. This was part of something bigger, something rotting at the root of culture itself. The idea that people could be denied service, respect, or basic dignity just for thinking differently. And worse, that some actually celebrated it. But not on her watch. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her communications assistant, Josh. "CNN's spinning it. They're calling it an abuse of power. Want me to prep a response?" She typed back, "No, let them talk. I'll handle this myself." She opened X and began crafting her second post of the afternoon, careful, sharp, and devastatingly clear. "Let me be perfectly clear. I didn't get Elijah fired. He did that himself. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't name drop. I simply asked to be treated like a customer. What happened next? That was his choice. The left keeps demanding accountability. Today, they got it." She hit send. Nicholas watched her as she set the phone down. "You know they'll scream louder now." From the corner of her eye, she noticed a woman filming again, quietly, nervously. Karoline didn't stop her. Let the world watch. Let them see what it looked like when a woman refused to bow. When she didn't just defend herself, but reminded everyone watching that truth still mattered. And if they didn't like it, they could order somewhere else. By the time the entrees arrived, pan-seared sea bass for Karoline and filet mignon for Nicholas, the narrative had already fractured into two Americas. On one side, she was a warrior who stood her ground with grace and clarity. On the other, she was the face of authoritarianism with a blow-dried smirk. But that was nothing new. Karoline had long stopped expecting fairness. What she demanded now was accuracy. And this time the facts were on her side, documented, time-stamped, and now broadcast to millions. Nicholas cut his steak with precision, his brow slightly furrowed as he scrolled through the latest online chatter. He looked up, his voice low but charged. "They've started digging into Elijah's background." Karoline didn't react. "Anything interesting?" Nicholas nodded. "Apparently he's been tweeting about this place for weeks. Stuff like, 'We're finally creating a safe space in Charleston. And we'll never cater to bigots here, no matter who they married.'" Karoline's fork paused just above her plate. "He said that?" Nicholas turned the phone screen toward her. The post was from just 3 days ago. A selfie of Elijah in the kitchen with the caption, "This isn't just a job, it's a mission. Keeping hate out. One table at a time." Karoline read it once, then again. A slow breath left her lips, not of surprise, but of quiet confirmation. "So he came into my husband's restaurant with a political vendetta and used his position to carry it out," she said, voice flat. "He wasn't managing a team, he was building a narrative." Nicholas leaned back, jaw tight. "And now, we're in it." "We've always been in it," she replied, "but now everyone else sees it." Just then, Marco, the assistant manager, returned, his expression cautious but composed. He stood at a respectful distance, arms folded behind his back. "Mr. Rio, Ms. Leavitt," he began, "Elijah has left the premises. Security escorted him without incident. I've already locked his system access and flagged his personnel file." Nicholas nodded. "Good. What about staff reactions?" Marco hesitated, then glanced around the room. A few are upset. 2 line cooks said they thought Elijah was defending their values. But the rest, they saw what happened. They know he crossed a line. Karoline sipped her tea. "Let them be upset. This isn't about punishing dissent. It's about refusing to reward sabotage." Marco straightened. "Understood. I've also spoken to the chef. He's briefing the kitchen right now on expectations moving forward. Professionalism only. No politics. No activism during service." Nicholas looked at him carefully. "And you, Marco? You ready to step up?" The young man didn't flinch. "I won't let this place become a battleground again." "See that it doesn't," Karoline said, her tone brisk. "Because the next time it happens, it won't be just one employee packing up. It'll be management." Nicholas tapped the edge of his plate, his mind clearly working ahead. "We're going to have to do more than fire Elijah," he said. "This kind of rot doesn't grow overnight. He had help, or at least cover." Karoline wiped the corner of her mouth with her napkin, her blue eyes locking onto his. Then rooted out. He nodded slowly. "Tomorrow I'll have HR do a full review. Backgrounds, social media. Anyone who's bringing their ideology into the workplace gets flagged." "Good," Karoline said. "And I'll draft a new policy tonight. No political messaging, no identity stunts, no targeting customers for who they are or who they voted for. You don't have to agree with someone to serve them dinner." Nicholas watched her, admiration simmering beneath his cool exterior. "Do you ever stop planning?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Only when I feel safe. And right now, I don't." From across the restaurant, another flash popped. A teenager had clearly tried to sneak a photo from behind his milkshake. Lunch was almost over, but the message had just begun. By the time dessert was offered, Karoline declined. Not because she wasn't hungry, though adrenaline had long since replaced her appetite, but because she wasn't done. This wasn't just lunch anymore. This was a battlefield dressed in linen and crystal. And while Elijah had already been removed from the floor, his stain lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Nicholas paid the check without a word. The restaurant, despite everything, still ran like a well-oiled machine. Servers moved swiftly but cautiously, as if walking on a stage that had just seen a collapse. Patrons kept pretending not to look, though nearly every table had a phone discreetly angled toward Karoline and Nicholas. The weight of what had happened stretched across every inch of space, from the gleaming wine rack to the white brick walls that now seemed to echo with the sound of quiet revolt. Karoline stood slowly, her posture straight, shoulders squared, not rigid, but intentional. She had mastered that stance years ago, the one that told the world she wasn't backing down even when the ground shifted beneath her. Nicholas stood beside her, his hand lightly brushing her lower back in a quiet signal, support, no words needed. As they made their way to the exit, the murmur in the restaurant sharpened. A woman in a black dress clapped once, softly, respectfully. Others followed, some awkward, some enthusiastic. One man stood hand over heart, muttering "thank you" under his breath. Karoline didn't acknowledge them directly, but her steps never faltered. Outside, the Charleston heat met them like a wall, thick and real, like everything that had just unfolded inside. Karoline stepped onto the curb, pulled her sunglasses down, and exhaled through her nose. The air tasted of magnolia and friction. Nicholas's driver was already waiting, parked along the brick-lined sidewalk. But before they reached the car, a voice called out, Karoline? She turned. A young woman, early 20s, college-aged, judging by the oversized backpack and political stickers slapped all over her water bottle, hurried toward them, phone in hand, camera already rolling. "You said you believe in freedom," the girl started, breathless, trying to match pace. "But you just got a guy fired because he expressed his beliefs. Isn't that the opposite of freedom?" Karoline didn't break stride, but she slowed just enough. "I believe in freedom," she said, voice calm and even. "But freedom doesn't mean refusing someone's service because of who they are. That's not freedom. That's cowardice dressed as virtue." The girl kept recording. "But don't you think—" Karoline turned fully now, her tone sharpening, not angry, but precise. "He didn't lose his job because he had beliefs. He lost his job because he acted on those beliefs in a way that violated every standard of hospitality, professionalism, and basic decency. If he wants to start a podcast, march in the street, write a blog, he can. But he doesn't get to turn my husband's restaurant into his personal protest zone." The girl faltered, just slightly. "But what about inclusivity?" "Inclusivity means everyone gets a seat," Karoline replied, "even the people you don't like." Nicholas opened the car door and waited. Karoline turned and stepped in, leaving the young woman standing on the sidewalk, the weight of logic settling like a stone in her hands. Inside the car, the leather was cool, the windows tinted, Charleston fading into the background as the driver pulled into the street. Karoline stared out the window, her voice quiet now, controlled. "They think they can redefine freedom to fit their worldview. But freedom without boundaries is just chaos." Nicholas nodded. "And people are finally seeing it." She glanced at him. They saw it today. Her phone vibrated in her palm. Another message from Josh. "Fox just picked it up. CNN's got 2 panels fighting about it. Hashtag hit #2 trending nationally." She showed it to Nicholas. He smirked. "Still want dessert?" She finally smiled. "I already had the whole meal." As the car turned the corner and disappeared down the tree-lined avenue, the restaurant behind them stood still, a quiet monument to a lesson learned in real time. When they pulled up to the private gate, the black SUV slowed, the security post giving an immediate green light. Nicholas's team didn't wait for names. They knew the weight the car carried. Karoline stepped out first. Not rushed, not flustered, just deliberate. Her heels tapped the stone path leading to the front doors of the house she had helped design, but rarely had time to enjoy. Nicholas followed, jacket slung over his shoulder now, the strain of the day sitting differently on him than it did on her. He bore the responsibility. She carried the strategy. Inside, the air was crisp, chilled just right, the kind of temperature that let your thoughts stay sharp. Karoline went straight to the study, her second war room after the White House press office. It wasn't big, but it was efficient. Glass desk, leather chair, a ring light mounted on the edge, just in case. 2 screens, always powered, always ready. She dropped her bag on the chair, booted up her MacBook, and opened X again. The dashboard was glowing like a siren. Mentions were up 2,800%. Follower count climbing by the second. Hashtags spinning out faster than her team could categorize. Some supportive, some venomous, but all loud. Nicholas leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, watching her work. "They're throwing everything they've got at you now," he said. "Washington Post, MSNBC, a few activist blogs calling for boycotts. They want you branded as the new face of conservative authoritarianism." Karoline clicked open a video panel, eyes scanning the screen without looking up. Of course they do. That's how they operate. The second a conservative woman doesn't cry, they call her a tyrant. The second she demands respect, they say she's abusing power. She clicked again, this time into analytics. Her video at the front desk, the one recorded by a customer mid-confrontation, had now hit 3.1 million views. Nicholas walked in and dropped into the leather chair opposite hers. They're already rallying around Elijah. There's a new trending tag. Elijah stood his ground. They're painting him as some kind of martyr for social justice. Karoline smirked. They always do. They don't care about facts. They care about feelings. And feelings make good headlines. She paused. But I have something they don't. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. Besides the truth? She turned the screen toward him. The footage from the security camera. It was crystal clear. Internal surveillance from the Ember Grill's front desk. Sound synced perfectly. Elijah's voice telling her, "We prioritize guests who reflect our values." Then, a few moments later, muttering under his breath, "Not MAGA scum." Nicholas leaned in, eyebrows lifting slightly. That wasn't in the guest video. Nope, Karoline replied, calm and collected. But it's on ours, and it's time-stamped. Same minute he deleted the reservation. She clicked open another screen, her prepared statement, short and devastatingly clear. The Ember Grill is a place for everyone. Unfortunately, one of our managers decided he could override that mission and turn away a guest based on political bias. That guest happened to be me. But this is bigger than me. This is about making sure every American, regardless of their beliefs, has the right to a seat at the table. That's not oppression. That's fairness. That's freedom. She hovered over the post button. Nicholas gave a slow nod. Once you post that, it's game on. She looked him dead in the eye. It already was. And she clicked send. Within seconds, the statement was live, paired with a freeze frame from the security footage showing Elijah mid-sneer. Finger paused over the keyboard. The caption beneath it read, "He didn't lose his job because of my politics. He lost it because of his actions." In less than a minute, Fox reposted it. Then Newsmax. Then 100 conservative influencers, journalists, and bloggers. It was retweeted with captions like, "Boom! She came with receipts," and "Watch the left try to spin this now." The first wave of response came like thunder, quick, jarring, and everywhere. Within 20 minutes of Karoline posting the security footage, the story detonated across the internet. Conservative pundits declared it a masterclass in composure, a textbook takedown of the woke elite, while liberal circles scrambled to pivot, casting Elijah as a victim of corporate suppression. But Karoline didn't flinch. She'd seen this playbook before, knew every headline before it was typed, and understood better than anyone that in this age, perception wasn't everything. Proof was. She didn't engage with every reply, didn't argue in the comment threads, or waste time chasing down narratives already falling apart on their own. She simply followed the truth with precision, like a prosecutor laying out evidence before a jury that had already made up its mind. Her voice, her posture, her tone, unchanged. Because the power wasn't in the noise. It was in the calm. Nicholas sat on the terrace, drink in hand, scrolling through the chaos while the moon hung heavy above the magnolia trees. Their estate overlooked the water, but tonight it wasn't peace they were watching. It was momentum, strategy, the slow, deliberate turning of the public tide. A storm was swirling on the screen in his lap, but in real life, the air was still, like the calm after someone fires the first shot in a war they never expected to lose. He looked up as Karoline stepped out, tablet in one hand, a blanket draped across her shoulders like armor. "They're scrambling," he said, nodding toward the screen. "I know," she replied, taking the seat beside him. "The New York Times just published a rushed op-ed. They're calling me a calculated manipulator who orchestrated a publicity stunt to attack marginalized voices. Nicholas gave a low chuckle. Marginalized? Elijah was the manager. He had the power until you walked in. Karoline's jaw tightened. They only care about who cries louder, not who was wrong. Nicholas took a sip from his glass and nodded. And now they're exposed. Not just Elijah, all of them. Every outlet trying to twist this into oppression. Every influencer using buzzwords to justify bad behavior. They weren't prepared for someone like you to answer with composure instead of chaos. She leaned back in the chair, blanket pulled tighter. I didn't walk into that restaurant expecting a battle, but if someone starts one in front of me, I don't leave it unfinished. The tablet buzzed in her lap. A text from Josh, her assistant. CBS just picked up your footage. Morning shows are requesting interviews. 2 think tanks want to use the video for upcoming panels on workplace discrimination. Want me to screen them? She replied quickly. Yes, and start drafting a long-form op-ed. I'll write it. They'll want my voice in print, not through a spokesperson. She paused, then added, title it, I sat down for lunch. They made it political. Nicholas looked at her, brow raised. You planning to make this a turning point? Karoline met his gaze. I already did, but now I'm making it policy. He leaned forward slightly. Meaning? Meaning I'm going to use this to build something bigger, she said. A platform, a coalition, a set of national standards that protect freedom in private spaces, restaurants, hotels, businesses. You shouldn't need a political test to order lunch, and no one should be punished for existing. Nicholas studied her for a long moment. You're not just pushing back. No, she said. I'm drawing a line. A line people have been afraid to draw because they feared the backlash. But I've already taken it. I've already survived it. And now I'll lead through it. He raised his glass again. To the quiet takedown? She shook her head. To the reckoning, she corrected. Behind them, the waves rolled softly. But inside that stillness was the roar of something rising. Something louder than rage, quieter than pride, but far more powerful than either. Karoline didn't need to win the argument. She had already won the room. Now, she was coming for the culture. The next morning broke crisp and bright, as if Charleston itself had no memory of the firestorm ignited just hours before. But the world remembered, and it was loud. By 6 a.m., she was seated at the kitchen island, a strong cup of coffee in one hand and a digital avalanche pouring into her inbox. The emails weren't just noise. They were signals. Thousands of messages from business owners, professionals, and everyday Americans who had seen the footage, heard the story, and decided finally that they weren't crazy. That the world had gone mad, and someone was finally saying what they couldn't. Nicholas entered quietly, buttoning his cuffs, already dressed in slacks and a crisp collared shirt. He glanced at her screen, catching a glimpse of an email's subject line. Thank you for standing up when we couldn't. He poured his coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her work. How bad is it? He asked. She didn't look up. It's not bad, it's a movement. He raised a brow. A movement? She turned the screen toward him. Dozens of forwarded stories, restaurant workers fired for praying over meals. Hotel guests turned away for wearing American flag hats. A bakery in Oregon sued because they refused to put politics on a cake. This has been building for years, she said. People don't want to live in fear anymore. They don't want to walk into a restaurant wondering if their beliefs will cost them their meal. Nicholas nodded slowly. So what now? She set her mug down. Now I turn this moment into a mission. Her phone buzzed again. It was Josh. She answered, putting it on speaker. Karoline, "You're going to want to hear this," he said, his voice sharp and urgent. "We just got confirmation. The Blaze, Daily Wire, and Turning Point USA all want to syndicate the op-ed. They're calling it the defining cultural story of the month." "Good," she said. "I'll send them the final draft in 30 minutes. Tell them I want it posted simultaneously. Full saturation." "There's more," Josh continued. "A donor from Texas just offered to fund a national awareness campaign. Billboards, online ads, maybe even a documentary. He said your composure reminded him of Margaret Thatcher." Karoline gave a faint, dry smile. "Tell him to fund it. I'll build it." Nicholas walked to the window, staring out at the long driveway lined with oaks. "If you're serious about this," he said, "you'll need infrastructure, a team, messaging discipline, legal minds to turn sentiment into policy." "I know," she said, "and I already have names." She opened her tablet and scrolled through a list. Former aides, policy wonks, speechwriters she trusted from the administration. People who understood not just politics but the culture war simmering just beneath the surface of every school board meeting and grocery store checkout. Nicholas turned to face her. "You're not just fighting for yourself anymore." "I never was," she replied. "But now I'm fighting for the woman who emailed me from Iowa, saying she was fired for posting a photo with her dad in a MAGA hat. For the veteran who told me his local diner told him he made people uncomfortable." She tapped her tablet again. "And for the restaurant owners terrified of hiring someone who might turn their business into the next viral hit piece." The house phone rang, an unusual occurrence. Nicholas walked over and picked it up, listening for a beat, then covering the receiver. "It's Mark Hensley, your hotel manager." Karoline raised an eyebrow. Nicholas handed her the phone. She took it calmly. "Mr. Hensley?" His voice came through shaky, strained. "Ms. Leavitt, I wanted to apologize again. I've been reviewing staff files all morning. Elijah wasn't the only one pushing that agenda. There were others. Quiet, but deliberate." "I figured," she said. "I've taken steps," he continued. 3 suspensions, 1 termination. We're rewriting our internal policies this week. We'll be aligned with your husband's values and yours." "You're not aligning with my values," she corrected. "You're aligning with neutrality. You run a business, not an ideological compound." "Yes, ma'am." She hung up without saying goodbye, then looked up at Nicholas. "Cleanup's begun." He nodded. "Still want to keep Mark?" "For now. But he's on borrowed time. One more mistake and he joins Elijah." Karoline turned back to her laptop and opened the video editing app. She clipped together her most direct footage, the moment she asked calmly for her reservation, Elijah's snide refusal, and her turning to the camera at the end. "So this is what happens now? You cancel a lunch over politics?" Nicholas watched her as the video uploaded. "You're becoming something bigger than a press secretary." She looked at him, her eyes unwavering. "I was always something bigger. It just took them this long to notice." And now they couldn't look away. By midday, the country had stopped pretending this was just about lunch. Karoline Leavitt's name was no longer trending. It was anchored at the top. Every major news outlet had picked up the story. Panels of media experts dissected her tone, her language, her restraint, trying to find the one thread they could tug on to unravel her. But there wasn't one. She hadn't screamed, she hadn't played victim. She had shown up with a reservation, been refused because of her politics, and calmly dismantled the narrative with evidence, clarity, and control. And now the world was watching something they hadn't seen in a long time. A woman from the right who wasn't defensive, apologetic, or desperate for approval. She didn't beg for the benefit of the doubt. She brought the receipts, and let the facts speak. Back at the estate, Karoline paced the living room, phone in one hand, earbuds in, listening to Josh give the latest media rundown. CNN split. Morning anchor says you handled it with disturbing elegance. One of their panelists called you a clear and present danger to the progressive agenda. Honestly, that line's going viral in our favor. Karoline let out a short breath through her nose. Good. Clip it and post it with a smiley face. Josh chuckled on the other end. Done. She pulled the earbud out and moved toward the grand window facing the back lawn. Nicholas was down there on a call, walking the property line, likely speaking with legal. Everything he did had doubled in intensity since the incident. It wasn't just about the restaurant anymore. It was about the brand, the empire. And after last night, he knew it. What started as one manager's mistake had become a full-on cultural firestorm. A lit match in a room soaked with gasoline. Her phone buzzed again. Another interview request, this time from a morning network that had practically branded her a villain 2 years ago. She didn't even flinch. She replied with one word: declined. She knew their game. They didn't want her voice, they wanted a trap. A 10-minute slot where they could ask passive-aggressive questions, cut her off halfway through the answer, and then bring in a communications expert to explain why she was too aggressive for American sensibilities. She'd rather light her own kitchen on fire. Instead, she focused her attention on the people who mattered, the silent majority, the ones who didn't scream on social media, who didn't work in newsrooms or tweet outrage for sport. The people who just wanted to live, raise their families, run their businesses, and not be penalized for what they believed. She opened her inbox again. One email stopped her cold. Subject: They did the same thing to my son. Karoline clicked. The message was short, from a woman in Pennsylvania. Her teenage son had worn a military-style "Don't Tread on Me" hoodie to a small-town cafe. The manager told him to leave, said it was aggressive. He left without causing a scene, went home, and cried to his mother. She'd emailed Karoline after watching the footage from Ember Grill, writing only one line: "Thank you for doing what my son couldn't." Karoline swallowed hard. That was it. That was the fight. This wasn't about liberals versus conservatives anymore. It was about the everyday citizen being quietly erased, humiliated, or rejected for not fitting the new definition of acceptable. And the people doing it? They didn't use fists. They used policies, language, social pressure, and they always framed it as kindness. But Karoline knew the truth. Kindness doesn't delete reservations. It doesn't call a teenage boy aggressive for a sweatshirt. It doesn't fire people for bowing their heads before a meal. That's not kindness. That's a new kind of cruelty, one that hides behind progress. She stood there for a long moment, watching Nicholas walk along the hedge line, phone pressed to his ear, the American flag flapping behind him on its polished silver pole. Then she turned back to her laptop and opened a fresh document. The title came quickly: What Happens When Tolerance Turns to Tyranny? She began typing. Not a tweet, not a thread, not a talking point. This would be the piece they couldn't dismiss. A long-form manifesto, part story, part warning, part call to action. In the opening line, she wrote, "I asked for a table. They gave me a microphone, so now I'm going to use it." Down the hallway, Nicholas walked in through the back doors. His call had ended. His pace quickened when he saw her at the laptop. "What's next?" he asked. Karoline didn't look up. "Now," she said, fingers still typing, "we put an end to this quiet discrimination. One business, one school, one boardroom at a time." She paused, looked up. "And we start with the places they thought were already theirs." Nicholas smiled, sharp and proud. She turned back to the screen, eyes steady, voice low. "They thought it was about lunch," she muttered. "Now it's about America." By evening, the Rio estate had transformed from a retreat into a command center. The parlor had become a temporary media hub. 3 staffers from Nicholas's PR firm were stationed at the large oak table near the fireplace, 2 laptops open, 1 TV playing a muted news loop. Josh was camped in the corner, phone pressed to his ear, whispering urgently to a journalist from the Federalist who wanted an exclusive. Karoline, however, was seated in the very center of it all, calm as ever, surrounded by noise but untouched by it. She had just finished her op-ed, over 2,000 words of direct, unfiltered clarity, and handed it off to Josh without a second guess. She didn't need edits. She didn't need approval. What she wrote didn't come from a think tank or a PR script. It came from experience. From the still-burning image of Elijah's smirk as he stood behind that restaurant counter, deleting her reservation like he was doing the world a favor. That image had embedded itself in her spine, and now it was fuel. The document would drop at 9 a.m. the next day across 3 major outlets. She already had Tucker's team requesting a sit-down, and a dozen governors and state reps had shared her original tweet. The word was spreading, and not just in red states. Nicholas stepped in from the hallway, holding his phone at his side, his face unreadable. "They're pushing back harder now," he said. "Multiple editorials already up calling your statement performative outrage." Karoline didn't look up. Of course they are. They have no defense, so they attack the tone. He walked toward her, his voice dropping. "The restaurant owner Elijah used to work for in Brooklyn? He gave an interview tonight, called you a threat to workplace freedom, claimed Elijah was practicing ethical discretion by rejecting customers who don't align with staff values." Karoline raised her eyes slowly. "Did he say that on camera?" Nicholas nodded. "Live. It's already been clipped. 30 seconds of pure ideological arrogance." Karoline reached for her phone and opened X. Within seconds, she found the clip. The man, a smug restaurateur in a black turtleneck, looked straight into the camera and said, "If a guest doesn't align with the mission of the staff, we reserve the right to refuse service. No one's entitled to comfort in spaces they ideologically oppose." She watched the video 3 times, then posted it with a short caption. "And they say I'm the authoritarian. Watch this and tell me who's really making the rules." Within minutes, it was viral. Her notifications lit up like fireworks. Conservatives quoted it with lines like, "She's right. This is what tyranny looks like in 2025. And this isn't about safety. It's about silencing." Even moderate voices chimed in. A well-known independent podcaster wrote, "I don't care where you stand politically. If your waiter's checking your voting record before seating you, we've lost the plot." She looked up from her phone and met Nicholas's gaze. "They're saying the quiet part out loud now," she said. "They actually think they own the public square." He pulled out a chair across from her, exhaled deeply and leaned in. "You've started something, Karoline, and I don't think it's going to stop here." She nodded. "It won't, because it's never just been about me. I'm just the one who finally said no, on camera, with evidence, and without flinching." Across the room, Josh stood, holding up his phone. "Karoline," he called out, "we've got a name." Everyone turned. Josh stepped closer, eyes gleaming. "There's a closed Facebook group, private, invitation only. Hundreds of service industry workers from blue districts. They swap stories, tactics. They're literally teaching each other how to quietly refuse service to people based on their appearance, speech, or even Instagram follows. Guess who's a moderator?" Karoline raised an eyebrow. "Elijah." Josh nodded. "And he posted yesterday, said he had a patriot at the front desk and was going to handle it quietly." The room went dead silent. Nicholas stood up, his posture straightening like a man about to issue an executive order. "We need that group archived, screenshotted, preserved, everything, and we go public with it." Karoline's jaw tightened. not in shock, in confirmation. "They're organizing," she said, "not just reacting. They're building systems to discriminate while pretending they're protecting people." Nicholas stepped closer, voice low. "And you just exposed it." Karoline looked down at her phone, then slowly stood, her voice calm but powerful. "This isn't a story about one bad manager anymore. It's a story about an underground network using the language of progress to punish dissent. And we just found the receipts." The PR staffers looked stunned. Josh had already started calling contacts to verify screenshots. The buzz in the room turned electric, shocked, angry, purposeful. She turned to Nicholas. "I want a press briefing here, at the estate, on the lawn." Nicholas gave a slow, approving nod. "Done." Karoline looked out the window again, past the trees, past the flags, into the darkness that had dared crawl into the light. By 9 a.m. sharp, the estate lawn was a battlefield dressed in elegance. Rows of folding chairs lined the brick path beneath the tall oaks, their leaves fluttering in the coastal wind, like silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. 2 podiums had been set up at the center of the courtyard, draped in the same deep navy blue that had become Karoline's unofficial uniform. Camera crews were already rolling, reporters milling around like sharks circling still water, unsure of the moment, but sensing something seismic on the horizon. Inside, Karoline stood in front of a tall mirror, straightening the collar of her white blouse. Her jacket, tailored, clean-cut, and unmistakably professional, rested perfectly on her shoulders. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes sharp, but not cold. This wasn't about rage, it wasn't about vengeance. This was justice, unapologetic, documented, delivered with surgical calm. Nicholas entered behind her, adjusting his tie. "You ready for this?" he asked. Karoline didn't answer right away. She turned from the mirror, picked up a folder from the table beside her, and held it up. Every screenshot, every comment, every message from that private server. Nicholas's jaw tightened as he took the folder, flipping through the first few pages. There it was, in black and white. Elijah's posts, coaching fellow restaurant workers on how to spot political conservatives, how to flag problematic guests in internal booking systems, and, perhaps most damning of all, a list of phrases to use when denying service while avoiding legal liability. It wasn't a conspiracy anymore. It was a blueprint. "They thought they were invisible," Karoline said, slipping her phone into her blazer pocket. "Now they're going to be seen." Outside, a staffer peeked through the door. "They're ready for you, ma'am." Karoline nodded once, then turned to Nicholas. "Stay close, but let me take the first few questions alone." He smiled faintly, proud but grounded. "You were made for this." She stepped outside to a wave of flashing cameras and low murmurs that hushed the moment she appeared. The reporters who had been whispering by the hedges now stood straight, eyes locked on her every step. Even the ones who hated her couldn't deny the power of the moment. She took the podium without notes. She didn't need them. "Good morning," she began, voice crisp and steady. "Over the last 48 hours, a story has unfolded that started with a lunch reservation and has now peeled back the curtain on something much darker, a pattern of targeted ideological discrimination in the service industry." Flashes popped. Fingers hovered over keyboards. The silence deepened. "I didn't ask for this fight," she continued. "I walked into my husband's restaurant under a pseudonym, ordered iced tea and grilled chicken, and was told, on camera, that I didn't fit the restaurant's values." She paused, letting the words hang. But that wasn't a one-off mistake. It wasn't just about one employee making a bad call. We now have proof, irrefutable proof, that Elijah, the former manager of Ember Grill, was a moderator of a private digital network dedicated to quietly purging conservative customers from progressive spaces. A ripple of murmurs broke through the crowd. She held up the folder. "This," she said, her voice slightly louder, "is documentation from that network. Hundreds of posts, dozens of active members, their methods, their language, their intent." She opened the folder and read, slowly and clearly. Guests wearing flag-themed clothing may be marked for vibe conflict. Use phrases like, "Our system is down," or "We're overbooked." If they mention politics in conversation, alert management. The crowd shifted, stunned. Some reporters stopped typing. Others typed faster. "This wasn't inclusivity," Karoline said, locking eyes with the cameras. "It was a blacklist. A targeted effort to cancel everyday Americans before they even sat down." She stepped back for a beat, letting the air settle. "Let me be clear. No one should ever be refused service because of their beliefs. Just as no one should ever be forced to conform to someone else's politics in order to enjoy a meal, book a room, or walk into a coffee shop." A reporter raised a hand. She nodded. "Karoline, what do you say to those calling this a form of soft McCarthyism, hunting for political enemies under the guise of consumer rights?" She looked at him directly. "This isn't about hunting anyone. This is about exposing those who have been hunting us. And they didn't do it with subpoenas. They did it with reservation deletions and denial of service, quietly, cowardly, and until now, unchecked." Another hand. "What's the end game? A lawsuit? Legislation?" Karoline smiled faintly. The cold smile of someone playing chess on a board others just noticed. "All of the above," she replied. "We're exploring legal options with civil rights attorneys now. And I've already begun speaking with several state lawmakers about enacting legislation that protects against ideological discrimination in public-facing businesses." More murmurs, more flashes. She paused once more, then looked straight into the camera lenses. "You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to vote the way I vote. But you should never be afraid that your personal beliefs will get you turned away from a table or a life you've built with your own hands. That ends now." She stepped back from the podium as Nicholas joined her, placing one hand lightly on her shoulder. The crowd erupted in questions, the reporters leaning forward, their tone no longer dismissive, but attentive. Some reluctantly respectful. Others visibly shaken. Karoline didn't linger after the briefing. She didn't pose for photos, didn't offer off-the-cuff sound bites. She walked off the estate lawn with Nicholas at her side, the cameras still clicking behind them, reporters shouting last-minute questions that she had no intention of answering. Everything that needed to be said had been said, calmly, clearly. Inside, the moment the front door shut behind her, the noise outside became just that, noise. Background static. White sound from a world she had learned to master by never letting it touch her spine. She walked into the sitting room where Josh had already set up a live monitor tracking national news coverage. A Fox anchor was calling the press briefing a political lightning strike, while MSNBC accused her of weaponizing customer service into culture war propaganda. On a split screen, they aired the clip of Karoline reading from Elijah's private group posts, the camera frozen on her face, clear-eyed and deliberate. "Let them spin," she said, tossing her blazer onto the arm of the chair. "Every time they talk about it, they bury themselves deeper." Josh nodded, phone in hand, eyes darting between messages. "You've got 17 interview requests in the last hour. 5 radio, 4 TV, the rest podcasts. The Blaze wants you live tonight. Tim Pool's team says you can take the whole hour if you want it." Karoline didn't answer immediately. She poured herself a glass of water and sat down at the edge of the leather couch, legs crossed, posture upright like she was still on camera. "I'll do the Blaze," she said. "They've earned it. But no fluff. No softball questions. I want the audience to see what this really is. An attack on the average American disguised as moral high ground. Josh started typing furiously as Nicholas came in behind him, laptop open. "We've got our legal team prepping a formal complaint," he said. Elijah's group operated across state lines. Some of their posts targeted military veterans, religious customers, and even people with visible disabilities. If we position it right, this isn't just ideological discrimination. It's a coordinated civil rights violation. Karoline looked up, something sharper flashing behind her eyes. "Good," she said. "Let them explain that one in court." Nicholas set the laptop down on the coffee table and sat beside her. "We also had 5 restaurant chains reach out confidentially. Owners who want to support your push, but they're scared. Said they've got staff members just like Elijah, quietly organizing, enforcing political vibes instead of service policies." Karoline exhaled slowly. "That's exactly what I was afraid of," she said. "This isn't a single incident. It's a culture, a contagion. These people think they're gatekeepers of morality, but they're just bitter tyrants with lattes and LinkedIn bios." Josh's phone buzzed again. He looked up. "Karoline, you're not going to believe this. Elijah just gave an exclusive to a progressive digital outlet." He doubled down. She raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Josh tapped the screen. He said he doesn't regret what he did. Said, quote, "I saw her face and knew what she stood for. I didn't need to read a name. I made a choice for the comfort of our space." Karoline leaned back, one hand pressed against her forehead. The audacity of it wasn't even surprising. It was textbook. "They always say that," she said. "They're always protecting someone's comfort. But it's never the people they disagree with. It's never us." Nicholas took out his phone and began typing. "Want me to respond?" She shook her head. "No, let me." She picked up her phone and opened X. Within seconds, she had drafted it. "I didn't make this political. He did. I didn't raise my voice. He did. I didn't ask for special treatment. I asked for a chair. That's what it comes down to. They think your values disqualify you from basic respect. I think they just disqualified themselves." She hit send. The tweet caught fire in seconds. Screenshots, quotes, supporters reposting it with comments like, "She's not just winning, she's teaching." Even neutral voices started joining in. A libertarian journalist replied, "Whatever your politics, this isn't how we treat people in a free country." Karoline sat quietly for a moment, watching the momentum grow like a wave building on the horizon. Not chaos, not noise, but purpose. People were waking up, not because she shouted, but because she made them look. Nicholas placed a hand on her shoulder. "You realize what's happening, don't you?" She looked over at him. "Yeah, you're not just fighting back anymore." "I know," she said, eyes steady. "You're leading." The sun had begun to dip over the oaks outside, casting long shadows across the floor like silent applause. Karoline stood, rolled her shoulders back, and walked toward the hallway. "I'm going to prep for the Blaze interview," she said, voice calm as ever. "But tomorrow, I want a strategy draft for legislation. Real policy. We're not just going to expose this." She paused, turning back. "We're going to end it." The Blaze interview wasn't held in a studio. Karoline insisted it be remote, filmed from the estate's sunroom, a space bathed in natural light and lined with white-trimmed windows that framed the green of the garden like artwork. It was intentional. No handlers, no makeup team, no glam lighting. Just a woman, a laptop, and a story the country couldn't stop watching. The camera went live at 7 p.m. sharp. The host introduced her with measured reverence. She's the former White House press secretary, the architect of one of the most viral political moments in recent memory, and tonight, she joins us to speak not just about what happened, but where we go from here. Karoline Leavitt, welcome. Her image filled the screen. Crisp blouse, hair pulled back, eyes clear, steady. "Thank you," she said. "Glad to be here." The host leaned in. "We've heard from pundits, we've read the headlines, but walk us through this moment, not just the restaurant incident, but everything that's followed." Karoline didn't pause. She didn't blink. She didn't soften. "I walked into a restaurant with a confirmed reservation under a pseudonym. I didn't demand anything. I didn't announce who I was, but the manager recognized me. He looked me in the eye and decided I didn't deserve a seat because of what I believe. He didn't debate me. He didn't challenge me. He just erased me." The host nodded. "And you didn't yell? You didn't make a scene?" "No," she said, voice low. "Because I didn't have to. I had the truth and the confirmation email. When you have proof, you don't need to raise your voice." He leaned back, letting the audience sit with that. "Karoline," he said, "you've started something here. People are calling it the reservation revolution, a pushback against ideological discrimination that's been operating in silence for years. Did you expect this kind of response?" She shook her head once. "No, I expected silence. Maybe a few sympathetic comments. But what I got was thousands of messages from people across the country who've lived through the same thing. Not on camera, not with headlines. Just quietly. Rejected, mocked, denied service because they dared to have a cross around their neck, an American flag on their hat, or a Bible verse in their email signature." The host glanced at his notes. "We've seen some of that already. Teachers fired over private tweets. Veterans denied entry for wearing political pins. Businesses blacklisted because they supported the wrong cause. You're saying this is bigger than restaurants?" Karoline leaned forward slightly, hands clasped. "I'm saying this is cultural gatekeeping. They're redrawing the boundaries of society and telling the rest of us we no longer qualify. And they're doing it under the banner of tolerance." The chat exploded. Comments flooded in, tens of thousands watching live. One viewer wrote, "She's saying what we're all thinking." Another, "This isn't just about Karoline, it's about all of us." The host continued, "So where does this go next? You've hinted at legislation. Are you preparing to take this into the political arena again?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "Yes, because exposure isn't enough. Viral moments fade. Policies don't. I've already begun working with lawmakers on drafting what we're calling the Equal Access Protection Act, state-level legislation that bans businesses from denying service based on political affiliation or perceived beliefs, not just for conservatives, for anyone." The host raised his eyebrows. "That's going to ruffle feathers." Karoline smiled faintly. "Good. The right feathers need ruffling." He leaned in again. "And to those saying this is just another conservative grievance campaign, what's your response?" She looked straight into the camera. "This isn't about grievance. This is about boundaries. This is about reminding people that you don't need to pass a political purity test to order lunch. You don't need to hide your faith, your patriotism, or your identity to sit down at a table." The host nodded slowly. "Last question. What do you want the American people to take away from this? Those watching at home, who've never gone viral, who've never pushed back, but are quietly tired of being told they don't belong?" Karoline exhaled, her voice soft, but unmistakably strong. "I want them to know they're not crazy. They're not alone. And they're not powerless. You don't have to scream. You don't have to burn anything down. All you have to do is stand, Stand calmly, stand firmly, and don't let anyone, no manager, no activist, no mob, tell you that your values make you less worthy of being seen." She paused, letting the silence carry her message home. The host said nothing at first. Then finally, "Karoline Leavitt, thank you for being here, and thank you for saying what so many are too afraid to." She nodded once. "We don't win by being loud. We win by refusing to sit down." The screen faded to black. Back at the estate, Karoline closed her laptop slowly, set it aside, and leaned back into the sunroom chair. Nicholas entered a few moments later, holding a glass of wine, and wearing that half-smile he reserved for moments when something tectonic had shifted. "You just changed the conversation," he said. "No," Karoline replied, eyes still fixed on the night sky outside. "I just reminded them they're allowed to speak." And now, they would. The next morning, the wind shifted. It wasn't the kind of breeze you felt on your skin. It was the kind that moved through inboxes, boardrooms, and morning strategy calls across the country. By 7:15 a.m., Karoline's interview had reached over 6 million views. Not a celebrity stunt, not a scandal, just a woman calmly stating what millions had been feeling for years. They were being pushed out of their own culture and told to smile while it happened. She sat at the head of the long oak dining table in the estate's library, where natural light poured through the tall arched windows. Her coffee sat untouched, going cold. She wasn't reading the news anymore. She was the news. And in that rare silence before the phone started ringing again, Karoline was writing. Not tweets, not sound bites, but the first policy outline for the Equal Access Protection Act. Across the table, Nicholas scrolled through the early press response. Legacy outlets continued doing what they always did, smearing without addressing, mocking without refuting. The New York Times ran a headline dripping with contempt. "From press secretary to patriot martyr, Karoline Leavitt's new crusade against wokeness." He didn't show it to her. He knew she didn't need to see it. The same people who wrote her off yesterday would be quoting her tomorrow. That's how it always went. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and finally they plagiarize you. Karoline looked up from her screen. "They've started using reservation profiling as a term," she said. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "I like it," she continued. "It hits. It sounds both ridiculous and real, which is exactly what this is. They'll mock it for a day or two, but it'll stick." He nodded once. "You're rewriting the language. That's half the battle." Josh walked in from the hallway, headset still on, coffee in one hand and his laptop in the other. His expression was equal parts wired and triumphant. "Karoline," he said, "we just got something. Big." She leaned back slightly, watching him. He turned the laptop around. A video, uploaded anonymously, had surfaced. Security footage from another restaurant, this time in Seattle. A woman wearing a Reagan Bush '84 t-shirt was told by the hostess that the restaurant reserved the right to protect safe spaces and would not be seating her. The woman never raised her voice, never argued. She simply left. But what happened next? The staff, unaware of the cameras, mocked her behind the counter. One called her another fascist grandma. Another said, "That's one less alt-right freak to clean up after." Karoline watched it once, then twice. She didn't blink. Her voice didn't rise, but her tone dropped like a blade. "Get it verified," she said. "Then get it everywhere." Josh nodded. "Already on it. Blaze, Daily Wire, Post-Millennial. I can have it circulating in under 30 minutes. "Title it," she added. They told her to leave. Then they laughed. Nicholas tapped his phone. We'll release a joint statement with 2 of the restaurant chains that reached out yesterday. If they're smart, they'll support the bill. This isn't about politics anymore. It's about protection. And they know it." Karoline nodded. Then she stood. When she walked, it wasn't with the urgency of a woman chasing headlines. It was with the poise of someone who knew the headlines were already hers. She made her way to the front study. Glass walls, clean desk, no clutter. It was her war room now. The file folder sat in the center. Not digital, printed. Inside, a complete copy of the post from Elijah's group. Highlighted lines, tags, timestamps, evidence of coordination. A network of low-level workers deciding, sometimes by appearance alone, who would be served and who wouldn't. She pulled out a pen, started circling names, not in anger, in clarity. Because this wasn't about one group anymore. This was about a culture of sanctioned bias wrapped in the language of empathy. And it was no longer happening in the shadows. Now, it had a spotlight. And she was the one holding it. Nicholas entered a few minutes later, his expression sober. "We just got word. 3 national companies are reaching out quietly. 1 retail, 1 hotel chain, 1 airline, all with the same message. We've seen similar behavior. We need guidance." Karoline looked at him, eyes like steel. "They don't need guidance," she said. "They need courage." He nodded. "But that's where you come in." She stared down at the file again, then closed it gently. "Schedule a meeting with them, one by one, and tell them this isn't about politics. It's about principle. If they wait for the mob to die down, they'll be next." Nicholas stepped forward, voice low. "You're building something here. You know that, right?" She nodded once. "I'm building a standard." Outside, the wind had picked up again, rustling the magnolia leaves across the lawn. The country was shifting beneath them, not violently, but deliberately. It wasn't a riot. It was a course correction. And Karoline wasn't standing in front of it, she was steering it. Her phone buzzed. A message from a Texas senator's office. "We've reviewed your draft language. We're in. Let's make this national." She smiled faintly, then replied, "Tell your staff to prepare a rollout plan. We're going state by state, and we're not backing down." The wind howled louder now. Not a warning, a signal. Because the moment Elijah deleted that reservation, he had no idea what he was erasing. It wasn't just a name, it was the match. And Karoline Leavitt? She was the fire. The day the Equal Access Protection Act was formally introduced in the Texas State Senate, Karoline didn't make a big announcement. She didn't tweet a countdown or post a glamour shot outside the Capitol building. She didn't need to. The silence spoke louder. The groundwork had already been laid with precision. Every interview, every briefing, every receipt dropped online like clockwork. By the time the bill hit the chamber floor, the public already knew what it meant. They had seen it, lived it. And now, for the first time in years, they saw someone actually doing something about it. Karoline watched the session remotely from the estate, seated in the same sunroom where her interview with The Blaze had shattered viewership records just days earlier. The live stream showed senators reading from her draft language line by line. It was clean, enforceable, and politically untouchable. The bill didn't ban opinions. It didn't silence staff. It simply said, if you open your doors to the public, you serve the public, all of them. She sipped her coffee, eyes never leaving the screen. Nicholas sat across from her, reading the early reactions pouring in from businesses across the country. Some outraged, others relieved. A few remained cautiously neutral. But the message was getting clearer by the hour. This wasn't fringe anymore. This was real. Josh burst in as always. He didn't knock anymore. "You're not going to believe this," he said, holding up his phone. "Remember that woman from the Seattle footage? The one mocked by the restaurant staff?" Karoline nodded. "She's just gone public. Gave a statement outside her church. Said she didn't want fame. Didn't even know she'd been filmed until it surfaced online. But now she's calling for more states to pass your bill." Karoline arched an eyebrow. "And the media?" Josh smirked. "Half of them are ignoring it. The other half are already scrambling to spin it. One anchor called it weaponized civility. Said you're using manners like a Trojan horse for extremism." She chuckled softly, but it was hollow. "They're panicking because I'm not what they expected," she said. "They don't know how to fight someone who doesn't scream." Nicholas leaned forward, folding his hands. "They want a villain. You won't give them one." Karoline turned back to the screen. The bill had cleared its first hurdle, passed the initial committee. Applause echoed faintly through the feed. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then looked up. "I want to go to Texas," she said. "Not for optics, not for the cameras. I want to meet with the lawmakers behind this. Personally, they stood up when it wasn't easy." Josh blinked. "You sure? That's a pretty open invitation for chaos. Protesters, press." "I'm sure," she cut in. "I won't hide while this moves forward." Nicholas stood, already dialing their travel team. "You'll be wheels up in 3 hours." Karoline rose slowly, gathering the folder she'd carried since this all began. Inside it was the now infamous printout of Elijah's internal group. The system logs from the Ember Grill, the screenshots, the notes, the policy draft. Her arsenal of proof. She paused at the door, glancing back toward the screen. The live stream was still running. The chamber was emptying out, but her name lingered in the commentary. Not as a guest, not as a controversy, as a catalyst. She turned back to Josh. "Have the communications team prep something simple. Just one line." He opened his notes. "What should it say?" Karoline didn't blink. "It started with one table. Now we're making room for everyone." Josh nodded. "I'll post it." She stepped into the hallway as the wind outside picked up again. Stronger this time. Not chaotic, but certain. They thought the moment would pass. They thought the fire would burn out. But they forgot who lit the match. And more importantly, who never let go of it. It started with a missing name on a reservation list. But that wasn't the story. The story was how Karoline didn't flinch when the door quietly closed in her face. How she stood there, not with rage, but with reason. How she held up proof, not a fist. And how, in a world addicted to outrage, she chose order. They tried to label her as dramatic, entitled, dangerous. But what they didn't count on was her discipline, her clarity, her refusal to play the part they wrote for her. While they mocked, she documented. While they scrambled, she strategized. And when the smirks faded and the receipts dropped, it wasn't just one manager who got exposed. It was a culture that had thrived in silence. Because Karoline Leavitt didn't yell. She didn't storm out. She didn't play victim. She walked through the fire with calm resolve, and on the other side she built something bigger than a headline. She built a movement rooted not in vengeance but in standards. The truth didn't arrive with hashtags or shouting matches. It showed up in a white blouse, clear eyes, and the kind of composure that makes people nervous because it can't be dismissed. Karoline reminded the world that sometimes the strongest protest doesn't sound like a roar. It sounds like, "I have a reservation." Thank you for watching. Tell me in the comments, where are you tuning in from? I want to see just how far this story has traveled. And if Karoline's stand stirred something in you, tap that like button so this message spreads even further. Want more stories like this, true, raw, and impossible to ignore? Click the next video on your screen. Until next time, stay steady. Speak the truth. Even when the room pretends it doesn't hear you.